After 3 years, the case was settled out of court. Nigel Havers did receive a share of his late wife's wealth. Under Sharia, this kind of dispute would have been unnecessary. Such a prescriptive approach to inheritance has obvious benefits, but there is also a more controversial aspect. A son automatically receives twice as much as a daughter. My wife Hannah and I understand how this would appear unfair. Our son stands to inherit twice as much as our daughter. But for us as Muslims, this makes sense in the wider context of family obligations.
Whatever he inherits, it's not really going to be his, because he will have responsibilities to look after other people. Whatever she inherits will be purely hers. I think Islam recognizes that men's responsibility and inheritance, there is a link between the two. And he will have to fulfill other responsibilities which Noura doesn't have to.
And if Noura is not married, and she's still at home, God forbid something happens to us, he will have to use his money and part of the inheritance to take care of his sister. So I think that even though it seems disproportionate, I think it's fairer. And nobody in the law of Sharia is cut out of inheritance. But some British Muslims believe that in modern Britain, where the woman can be the sole breadwinner, the idea of a sister being financially dependent on her brother's obligations is unfair.
There's no reason to have a specific set of inheritance rules just for Muslims. If my father wanted to divide his property equally amongst his daughters and sons, I don't see how that's necessarily un-Islamic, because that's to assume that a daughter needs to get a lesser share than a son is to assume that certain family structures and units operate. In some case scenarios, yes, that's true, but in my family situation, it's not. The women are the breadwinners and providers of themselves. We don't rely on any man to do that for us.
Of course, other Muslims would argue that in Islam, the roles of men and women are complementary rather than unequal. And I think this is perhaps one of the big philosophical differences between Sharia and British law. But when it comes to applying some aspects of Sharia into the British legal system, there are also concerns about how practical it will be to implement.
I think the fears amongst the British public about implementation of Sharia are genuine and extremely understandable, because the word Sharia conjures up idea of a foreign law, an alien law. It conjures up idea of capital punishment, corporal punishments, beheadings, executions, stonings, etc. And what it doesn't mean to most British people is truth and justice and spirituality, which is really what Sharia is all about. It's the way to God.
A number of Muslim and non-Muslim voices are also concerned that Sharia could lead to social tensions.
I think the problem about trying to have a Sharia law is it would actually create a division between Muslims and non-Muslims. But what is really the problem is that there isn't one Sharia. There are different schools of law. And amongst Muslims, we cannot agree which Sharia law. So we would be at each other's throats, you know, my Sharia law is the best. And actually all that would do is build old traditional barriers between each group of Muslims against the other and the variety of groups of Muslims against the society.
And it's very important for Muslims to stop demanding a separate legal system, stop demanding separate Sharia courts, and realise that we are all British citizens together, and how we can contribute to the national debate together and come up with justice or rules that work, which we're all happy with.
By incorporating a single interpretation of Sharia law within the British system is to assume that this law applies to every single Muslim in this country. And that's wrong, because I don't want that law to apply to me. I don't think British law should pander to a specific community or a specific religion. We don't have Sharia law in Britain at the moment, and yet there's so many Muslims who are able to live here and practice their faith and religion. I am able to pray, fast, celebrate Eid. I don't see how British law is stopping me from doing that.
The minute you criticize Sharia, people say, well, we're not going to have stonings and amputations. It's just civil matters. And what we're saying is that actually civil matters are some of the pillars of women's oppression in countries like Iran, Iraq, and Afghanistan. Many women have fled because of those very rules. It's discriminatory.
These are genuine concerns, and I don't want to underestimate them. In this film, I've looked at the effect of accommodating Sharia rules to civil cases, such as marriage and divorce, not criminal cases. Although I recognize that there are some Muslims who do not want to see any parts of Sharia in this country, personally I have found many benefits and little harm. Moreover, as a Muslim who believes Sharia is divinely inspired, I need to find a way to live both by UK law and Sharia. What would my experts see as the benefits of such moves?
As a lawyer, there are some very interesting parts of Sharia law, and we ought to look at it, and we ought to take the good parts from Sharia law and look very carefully about introducing them here. So I think this is a very important topic, and it shouldn't be dismissed, and there shouldn't be an outrage and an outcry.
If we were to carefully select aspects of Sharia, see how we can incorporate them within our legal framework, so that the Muslim citizens of our country are able to contribute to the betterment of our country, but at the same time also feel satisfied that they are not breaking God's law. And for a Muslim, it is a question of serving the country, but also serving God, and thereby earning a reward from God.
I think there are many things that Sharia brings to the table which would add value to the legal system. For example, the emphasis on conciliation or mediation to try and resolve your problems before you go to court, or at least minimize the acrimony. And on top of that, a very important one is the concept of no-fault divorce, not having to find something to blame in the other party.
If the two systems were combined, then I personally feel that people, particularly women, are more likely to get their rights because they do want to resolve things in the sight of God. And I think that is very, very important for every Muslim.
Systems of law change and adapt. In Morocco, for example, men can no longer get away with divorcing unilaterally. Both men and women have to go to court. If Sharia can adapt, surely so can English law. Laws are being constantly amended and updated, taking into account the changing nature of society. Archbishop of Canterbury said the British system already recognizes some aspects of Sharia, such as financial products that are Sharia compliant and of course legally binding. I believe if incorporation is done sensibly, it can only help improve social cohesion with the British Muslims.